I've built a new castle MOC and it's got plenty of dark pink all throughout it, because regular greens and browns are boring and pink looks great on fantasy MOCs. So let's talk about the details and techniques used in this MOC. Let's also break down a few things with instructions, and I'll highlight some interesting parts of the build process and the inspiration behind the build as well. Let's begin. Before starting this MOC, I knew I wanted to build something castle related, but I wasn't really sure what that entailed. I just wanted to make castle. I kind of always want to make castle. Still, I began by doing some research and looking online for cool castle MOCs and other fantasy related imagery and things to get my creative juices flowing. Oddly enough, the thing that grabbed my attention was this Minecraft build, or a series of Minecraft builds by a person named Sword Shelf MC. They'd built a variety of different awesome stuff in Minecraft, and what really grabbed me were the series of interesting and quirky colors that they used. When I saw what they made, I thought about how I'd recently acquired a bunch of these medium lavender leaf pieces in lug bulk, and I thought, well, let's focus on a color scheme of this MOC that's weird, out there, and different, something that I've not really done before. This is nice to know that just the color scheme alone was enough to really hook me on this build. It was also interesting too to think that a Minecraft build of all things inspired this MOC. If you're looking for inspiration on a LEGO creation, don't just look at LEGO, look at concept art, look at weird other different creative mediums that might have a bit of overlap with LEGO, or even ones that have no overlap with LEGO. You never know what weird and wonderful stuff might just get you inspired. Anyway, I liked the idea of some kind of six-sided tower that would rest on this uniquely colored landscape. So I began messing around with some hinge bricks and mapping out a kind of rough shape for this building. When I was comfortable with the rough size of this building, I began to play with a Technic frame that would allow the gaps in between these hinge plates to be covered up. As you can see on the final design, the gaps here are covered up with these large support beams. Of course, that's how it looked in the end. I had to sit from the start and think, well, how am I going to do this? And here's how it's done. It's not hugely complex, but there's a little bit we can break down here, so let me show you. Basically, there's just two of these sort of sections that are mirrored on both sides. It uses a bunch of these triaxial connectors on the top and then also some on the bottom as well. On the bottom, it connects out into one of these 1x2 lift arm pieces, and then it also on the other side connects to a 1x3 teardrop lift arm. The teardrop lift arms are really cool because they allow you to place axles in between these connectors here, and it just helps with the maths of this design. That way everything's properly lined up. So this whole sort of substructure connects into some Technic bricks in the middle, and that actually links all the Technic in with the rest of the LEGO system bricks. Then miraculously everything just lines up perfectly, and the Technic axles just fit in between the gaps of the bricks. But they don't quite fit in between the gaps of the bricks. If there were two bricks on the edges there, it wouldn't fit through. So I had to replace one of those bricks with a 1x1 cylinder brick. This sort of curved edges of this brick here makes it so that the axle can slide in between. If you don't use these curved bricks on the edges here, the design's not going to work. A lot of trial and error was involved in getting that to work. LEGO maths is never really my strong point. I don't really sit down knowing all the geometry and everything. I really just sort of try things until it works, and that's just such an important process of the LEGO creative building process, or any creative process for that matter, is just a bunch of trial and error and trying things, building it again, destroying it, building it again, until it works, and that's exactly how I did this. And most of this build as well. So yeah, that's roughly how the base was built so that the support beams could be placed on the edge of the bottom of the tower. Here's the rough construction of one of these support beams. They do just pop off if you really want them to. You can see how I've used some of these 1x1 modified bricks with studs on two sides so that I can place tiles on the edges just to round it off in a nice fashion. Since this is a six-sided tower, the rest of the walls are fairly easy to do. You basically just repeat the same thing 6 times on each side. But of course, one side does have a door. We'll go back a little bit here and I'll show you how this door was placed in and how it was built as well. One of the fun things I like about this design is how I use these roller skate pieces for the hinges on the door. Because these pieces are a little bit smaller, it's a nice kind of subtle but still very realistic detail that just elevates the door a little bit. And mixing the different shades of brown here help it look like some sort of old wood that's been used for this door. Now, as the tower kept expanding up and up, I transitioned into placing these chi slopes on the edges instead of those structural supports that I showed you before. Thankfully, the maths of this works perfectly so that with this 6-sided tower, all the edges have no gaps and it all just looks seamless. Plus the cheese slopes sit nicely just above these support beams, and I thought that was a nice transition of the pieces. As I continued to build it, I would branch out every so often with more of these hinge plates and other Technic plates to help support the design. Eventually the tower was finished, and as you can see in some of these earlier design photos here, the tower looked kind of different. I experimented with adding some sand blue as an accent color, but I don't know, I just didn't like it. Everything was just too monotonous. And so I felt the addition of a new color was needed. This is when I eventually added dark tan and brown into the design and made it look almost a bit more like a wizard's tower than just a traditional castle tower. But before I did any of that, I began to experiment with the landscape underneath the tower. You can see that I've placed a variety of random colored bricks and plates to map out the rough height of the hills and valleys of this landscape. The colors of these bricks didn't matter because it was all going to get covered up anyway, but the height of it did matter. Now this was helpful for me because it made me focus on the bigger picture of the build. I always knew in the back of my mind that I was working to get to this specific height for the rock work. Of course, later on this actually got more or less double the height that it currently is now, but it was still really helpful to know the rough size that I needed to achieve so that as I was building, I had a sort of goal to be reaching. Plus, I have a tendency sometimes to make my landscape very flat, so it was very helpful to know where I needed to go so that it would actually naturally look the height that it needed to look. Here's an early draft of the landscape. I really wanted to put a well into the design at first. I've never actually put a well into a castle MOC, so I was excited to do so. And I really loved the design that I built, but I really wasn't a fan of the landscape around it. The dark pink was good, but it was just too bland. It was just a large amount of pink. It was boring. I wanted to add leaves and rocks and stems and other things that makes it look more natural and realistic. So I ended up scrapping this design and opted for a more rock-focused design with hints of stems and flower plants and other things. Plus, I deliberately added more rocks into the design because I didn't have a lot of dark pink bricks and plates on me at the time, so adding in more rocks meant that I needed to add less dark pink, and so that way I didn't have to spend as much money. So it was kind of a win-win. Didn't have to spend as much money on parts, and overall the build looked better, at least in my opinion. I wanted to add in that well, I really did, but I just didn't think it worked with the rock work that I designed, so next time, well, I'm sorry. So yeah, the build progressed from there into what it is now, and I was very happy with the rock work. I managed to include some of these heart-shaped dark pink plates. These were actually from the Pick-a-Brick wall at the time, and I thought that was a really fun detail. Plus it was a pretty easy and accessible way to get a lot more dark pink plates. Now overall, I think it was really refreshing and fun to use pink instead of browns or greens for the castle landscape here. There was something nice about these colors that felt like a Disney film. It really fit that fantasy vibe. So I'd love to experiment with colors like this again in the future, especially since LEGO offers a lot more uniquely colored leaf and plant elements these days. So it's kind of easy to do. Back when I was building this, which was actually around October 2022, the new Avatar sets were coming out, and I saw the new Dire Horse piece, and my parents actually suggested that I put it into this diorama, which was a great idea. Thanks, Mum and Dad. There was something nice about the contrast of this bright blue horse up against this dark pink landscape. I think it just perfectly fit that high fantasy vibe of this MOC. At first I was a little hesitant of using an avatar horse in a castle MOC because I thought there might be a bit of confusion, but I don't know, I thought that was also kind of limiting. Why purely can you only use an avatar horse piece in an avatar MOC? It still kind of fits that fantasy vibe and it works really well here. Why not? So yeah, that's the basics of this build. I'll leave you with a few more nice shots of the diorama. Hopefully you enjoyed seeing some insights of how areas of this build were built and learning about elements of the building process as well. If you're keen for more of this, let me know. I'm going to be doing a bunch more videos like this, so stay tuned if you're interested. Thank you very much for watching, happy building, and bye for now.